Hello there. Today I thought we would have a look at some of the beginner basics pocket guides to bird watching and give you my thoughts and what's in those books and how they compare to different ones. So today we'll start with this one, which is a Collins Nature Guides garden book, Garden Birds of Britain and Europe, which means if you're in Britain we will get lots of birds in here that are so infrequent visitors, so they're like migratory or passing through. It's, you know, interesting. I'm concentrating this session on birds of Britain and Europe because that's where I am. So this one's quite a nice size, even though it is Europe as well. That might suit you, you might like that. There's over 100 birds in this book, which is pretty impressive. Let me show you there, and that's kind of what it's laid out like. I prefer photographs to illustrations because it gives you a truer representation of what you're looking at in the book, and they're nice and they're big. That's really good for beginners to have a look at that. So I really like this book. This was my first book. So yeah, 2009 I bought this book and it served me quite well. It doesn't look very used, but it is. I mean, it's quite a nice substantial book, and because it's got like a wipe clean kind of cover on it, so if you drop it in the mud or it gets splashed with rain or mud or whatever, you can just wipe it clean. Pictures inside not so much, but the cover is nice and like waterproof. I never thought about that until now actually. That's pretty impressive. Only downfall I find with this is it's got nice, it's wordy descriptions. There's no like giving you a map of distributions and things like this. It's very much and the font, so you're going to struggle if you have eyesight problems. You're going to probably struggle with this book quite a bit. I mean, I struggle with this book, but then I don't read it very often. For me, I only use it to look at the pictures so I can identify a thing, and then I've got other books when I get home to go and do the research on. But if all you want to do is use the pictures, that's really cool. Some of the birds have birds' eggs identifications on them, so that's quite a nice little touch. It's not a very visual book, so it's only got the pictures of the birds, and the birds are limited. I don't know why. Quite often in bird guides they only show the male of the species. It's like, yes, but as a beginner and as an anybody, you would want to learn the females and the juveniles, or do you know what I mean? Which is really weird and frustrating if you want to learn, because you obviously want to learn all the other colours, because sometimes the female is very different to a male, or sometimes it's just so incredibly subtle that only people who are really knowledgeable are just going to know the difference. It is disappointing that quite often with these books, with pocket guides or handbooks, they only show the male of the species. It's like, just because they're big and flashy, it's like, yes, but we need to learn how, you know, all the others. It's a bit sexist, considering we've got to learn, you haven't got to, but you know, it's nice to learn all the other birds, what they all look like, because the juveniles are vastly different to the adults. The females are quite often very different to the males. So if you see a bird and you think it's a dunnock, how are you going to know whether it's a female or a male? For example. I tell you what I find is really quite strange with this book is that it's got some wildfowl in there, so your geese and ducks, various kinds of ducks and water birds, unless you live on a big fancy estate with a lake, then you're not going to get water birds in your garden. Correct me if I'm wrong. Who gets water birds in the garden? Let me know. There's a special section in it, and it's 4 pages at the back, and it seems like it's a little bit of an afterthought. There's 4 pages in the back. How to help a lost baby bird, how to identify unknown birds, providing nesting opportunities, and helping birds in the garden. Now, I would welcome this as a general rule, but it seems like a bit of an afterthought. This information is at the beginning of the book. It's the start of your journey. So I feel like it's been put in the back as a little bit of an afterthought. The font is so incredibly tiny that you would struggle to read it long term. Like if you want to sit and like research it and you know, for half an hour or so, I struggle with all the font in this book because it is quite tiny. I mean, yes, it's a small book, but the font needs to be, don't be cramping things in, because lots of us wear glasses, and if you haven't got glasses on, you're going to struggle. But other than that, I think it's a really good book. I would recommend this book because I like the pictures. I mean, they are very clear, they're very big, there's 2 per page. And sometimes they will give you eggs and babies and things like this, but not very often. So here we've got yellow wagtail, but it's got the eggs there as well. So you've got a little bit of spiel and the eggs, but it hasn't got that for all. So they kind of pick and choose what information they want to give you. I suppose it's because I've only got a limited amount of place. So yes, I would recommend that one. It's quite good. The next one we've got is Pocket Garden Birdwatch, and it's by the RSPB. I believe you can still get this one, and any of these books you can actually pick up second hand as well on your eBays and that sort of thing. The Pocket Garden Birdwatch, this is the 3rd edition. So I think I bought this brand new back in 2014 or thereabout. It's really nice, this one. It's nicely laid out, it's easy to read, and it's got all kinds of things. And it starts with advice on water, food, nesting, territory, about birds, migratories, nesting and rearing, courtships. So it's got a little introduction at the beginning that's about like 30 pages long, which is impressive. It's quite nice. And then they go into birds in your garden, so the habitats, types of feeders, suburban gardens, urban gardens, that kind of thing. And I think, again, it's the same kind of size as the previous. It has some basic equipment needed. It has a section about that. It also shows you anatomy, identity, plumage, size and shape, that sort of thing. It gives you nice advice on all kinds of things. It starts with advice. So you've got territories, it talks about territories, singing, courtship, migrations, what they do in spring and summer and all the seasons, nesting and rearing, habitats, gardens, habitats, shelters for the birds, ground feeding, nesting, what kind of food to feed them. They've got all kinds of things like that you can do. So it's got all kinds of things like that. What to do in a small garden, if you've got a small garden. I haven't even got a garden, I've got window feeders. You can make nest boxes, what kind of nest boxes. It gives you a little section on threats to garden birds, suburban gardens, urban gardens and country gardens. And then it goes into identity, identifying individual birds, but it also gives you anatomy, plumage, markings, sizes and shapes, you know, how to watch them, what the shapes of beak, different types of beak tell you what the food is actually that it's actually eating, and then it gives you a section on the birds, how to identify certain birds. So it all encompassing ones. It's not just identifying birds, it's talking about all kinds of things relating to gardens and bird watching. So it's not really identifying your bird kind of book, even though it does have some birds to identify, but it's not comprehensive. But it is really nice. If you want to get started and you don't know how to start, this gives you quite a few birds. It's got the top 40 birds that you might find in your garden in Britain. So, you know, features detailed profiles of the top 40 garden birds. It's very small book, but it's packed full of absolutely excellent information. Like I say, anatomy and small gardens and what kind of feeders that's out there and this sort of thing and what they feed on. It's an all-round excellent book to start with. Excellent book. This next book I've had for, again, about 5 or 6, maybe 7 years now. Can't remember where I got it from. I believe it might have been one of the a garden centre, because if you look in garden centres, and they've got like a little book section, quite often you will find pocket guides of various sorts and of various prices. I believe this one was slightly more expensive, but that's because it's thicker. It's got 320 of the most common birds in Britain and Europe. So again, it's a Europe one, so you'll get more birds in it that we don't actually see in Britain or wherever you are in the world. I like this one. It's really nicely laid out. It's got sections on all the birds. It's got a map illustrating where birds can be seen throughout different various seasons. The photos and illustrations mix, so it's both photographs and illustrations, which is, you know, quite nice, because then you get to see certain birds at certain angles. This book has some of the birds in silhouette, so in flight, because quite often when we see birds, that's all we see. We see it flying. So if you can learn the shape of the bird in flight, you'll know that that's what that is, even though you haven't got any great detail. You've just got a silhouette, and that is really quite interesting. I like that they've included some of the birds in flight. In fact, most of the birds are in flight, I think, as well as standing on the ground, so you get a good idea of what you're actually looking at. I find this one quite interesting. It is a little bit on the heavy side for a pocket compared to the other two that we've just had a look at, but overall I would recommend. This book has detailed descriptions of what it feeds on, how it feeds, where you can find them, and sometimes it will say at the bottom similar species. So you might think, oh, I've seen a thing, but then it might give you a similar species to, let's say, a dunnock, for example. Again, with this book, they often only show the male plumage, which is frustrating, and I'm not sure why anybody does that. It's quite strange that you would have a pocket guide that's not that comprehensive in that sense. At the front of the book, we've got a little key of how to use this book, including what all the little symbols mean. So you've got symbols for male, female, juvenile, immature and adult, and whether they're seen through the various seasons. Overall, I rate this book. It's quite a nice one. It's interesting, it's very detailed in it. For the size of the book, it gives you quite a little bit of detail on various things. Again, it's got wading birds in it, but it is Britain and Europe, so it's not really a garden bird book like the previous two. Our next book will be called What Is That Bird? Now, I've seen various of these in other, like What Is That Tree and What Is That Plant and all of this sort of thing. So it's obviously a little series of pocket guides, and I believe again that this one is also still available. This book contains 150 birds of Britain and Europe. It is really nice. It's a nice size. It doesn't weigh very much, so it won't weigh your pocket down, so that's good for a pocket guide. It's not as comprehensive or as detailed as the previous ones, but it does show you some things. It is super simple, and I like super simple when you're learning stuff, because otherwise you just get fed up and you won't want to learn. But it gives you the basics to start with. It gives you a starting point, a starting block, if you like. So yes, it's super simple, and I often find the bird ID that I want to find because it is super easy to use. I do like this book. Again, it only often shows the male of the species, which is frustrating. It is a nice, simple, basic guide at a very basic level, which is why I wanted to show you these things, because everybody has to start somewhere. It does, as I have said, lacks the depth that the other three that we've looked at so far have. But if all you want to do is go out and be able to identify it, then you can come back and do some cross-referencing in your other books that you may have in future. This book is a reasonable starting point, but at some point quite quickly you might find it quite limiting and want to add another pocket guide or a handbook to your collection. Overall, I would recommend this one. The next book we have to look at, which is the last book, so bear with me, is the RSPB Handbook of British Birds. Now, I picked this up because it was British, only British, not Britain and Europe, and that is why I picked this one up. It is quite big, it's quite thick, it is a handbook, not a pocket guide. There's the comparison of your pocket guide. So that's your... This, I picked up this one. It is the newest book in my collection. I picked this up early this year, or kind of last Christmas or thereabout. And whilst it's not a pocket guide, I thought I would throw it in the mix as a bit of a comparison, as it's similar to all the pocket guides that we've been looking at. Most birds in this one do have a male, a female and a juvenile, so that's a massive plus point. So if you're going to just like watch out your garden and you just want to put this on your coffee table so you've got it to hand in case you see something, then I would recommend this book. Along with the male, the female and the juvenile, it also shows occasionally one or two others that have like first year plumage and second year plumage, because some animals, some birds change from year 1 to year 2 or year 2, you know. So sometimes you just get a juvenile and they're like in juvenile colours for 12 months. This is the 5th edition, which was out last year, I believe. The book contains an identification chart, so it shows the food that they eat, the breeding, how many times a year they breed, how many eggs per clutch they have, so per session, if you like. I like this book because it's full of in-depth, fascinating insights and facts. So you've got conservation status, which is, you know, pretty cool. So in the case of a robin, it's a green status. Population and breeding trends in winter. When do robins breed? i.e. when do they nest, how many eggs and how many broods per year they have, lifespan, rough weight, incubation to fledge time. So for a robin it says incubation and fledging, 15 days to incubation, and then they hatch at day 15, and then it's 13 to 16 days before they fledge. So they spend 13 to 16 days in the nest. I think this has got some really excellent in-depth information if you wanted to take it the next step up, or you wanted a book that you knew you weren't going to put in your pocket. Whilst this is quite good, it does weigh quite a ton, even if you're putting it in a bag. If you've got a bag that's already got lots of stuff in it, that's still going to weigh your bag down quite considerably. So yes, those are some of my books that I currently use as references and learning points. So which one would I recommend overall? So which one would I recommend to you just starting out? I would recommend this one, the Pocket Garden Birdwatch. Even if you don't have a garden, you will still see something, and it gives you an indication and a nice introduction to the world of watching the wildlife around you. I hope you found this video really interesting. Let me know your book recommendations, or which book did you like from what we talked about today. That's all for today. Thank you for sticking around, and I will see you all really soon. You take care now.